Hey guys, tonight we travel far across the sands and through the flickering centuries, into the heart of West Africa where the hiss of molten metal and the quiet ring of hammer on anvil once echoed beneath starlit skies. You step softly into a village where smoke curls gently from a circular forge hut, the air thick with the scent of iron and firewood. It's warm here not just from the heat of the furnace, but from something older, deeper, a kind of ancestral memory that clings, poor to the soil, to the stone, to the tools resting beside the hearth. You're not just in a blacksmith's shop. You're standing at the crossroads of power, mystery, and community. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes trying to swing a hammer in this heat without fainting face first into a pile of glowing charcoal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Share it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire has already been lit by the time you arrive. A rhythmic whoosh of bellows in the shadows feeds oxygen into the clay furnace, making it glow a fiery orange. It's hypnotic. You crouch beside a boy no older than 12, whose focused lips pressed together, one hand steadying the bellows, while his father adjusts something with a pair of long iron tongs. This isn't just a family business, it's a rite, a sacred rhythm passed from palm to palm, across generations, you see. In much of pre-colonial West Africa, stretching from modern-day Senegal and Mali to Nigeria and Ghana, blacksmith wasn't merely a tool maker. He was something like a priest engineer, a quiet architect of society. With just a hammer and flame, he could transform brittle red earth into a spear, a hoe, a bracelet, or, in some cases, a king's legacy. Historians still argue whether iron emerged independently in sub-Saharan Africa or was introduced from North Africa or the Near East. The evidence is murky, like ash clinging to a cooling blade. But what's clear is this: as early as 1000 BCE, communities in places like Nok, in what's now central Nigeria, were already working iron in ways that stunned later archaeologists. Pictured this in a forest clearing, hidden from the village. By intention, a domed clay furnace smokes beside a tree ringed with charms and carvings. The blacksmith arrives at Donut with swagger, but with a quiet, practiced stride. He wears no armor, no gold, but villagers lower their voices when he walks past. Because he holds a dangerous gift, he takes stones from the earth and pulls power from them. And tonight he's making a blade. Not for war yet, but for clearing bush, for tilling a patch of new farmland. A life-giving blade. You watch the metal glow and shrink, hiss and harden, bend and stretch. There's a kind of music to it, even if the melody is just the beat of the hammer and the occasional grunt. Ironically, though iron itself is solid and heavy, the world it shaped was often fluid. In places like the manned, speaking regions, blacksmiths were part of caste's special social groups whose roles were both respected and rigid. The Numu caste, for example, included generations of blacksmiths who were seen as part magician, part craftsman, part diplomat. They married within their caste, performed rituals others couldn't, and were sometimes called upon to settle disputes. You don't question someone who bends metal like dough. And they didn't just make tools. They made drums, weapons, musical instruments like the balafon, even charms and fetishes that promised protection, wealth, or love, though. Let's be honest, love charms have a spotty success rate, even when forged in sacred fire. As you lie back in your imaginary hammock, lulled by the dull clink of metal, plus, and the crackle of embers, you start to notice something deeper, a pattern. These smiths weren't isolated tinkerers. They were embedded in the very bones of the community. They provided the tools for farming, the spears for hunting, the bangles for marriage, and the bells for ceremony. Try running a village without them. You'd last about a week. Fun fact. Some early European explorers wrote awkward, confused journals, trying to make sense of the smith's social role. One Portuguese sailor in the 15th century was baffled. These toolmakers were given huts near kings and sometimes forbidden to eat certain foods. Are they witches? He wondered aloud. Not quite, but they definitely lived closer to the gods than most, and sometimes too close to danger. In regions like the Volta Basin, smiths were expected to handle not only hot metal, but also hot tempers. If a neighbor accused someone of sorcery, call the smith. If a drought came and the gods needed appeasing, call the smith. If the king's spearhead snapped in battle, call the smith. And maybe don't look him directly in the eyes. Of course, not every smith wielded this kind of clout. In some regions, they were feared or even marginalized, respected, but kept at a distance. It's one of those weird dualities. The person who makes your life possible is also the one you whisper about after dark. And just when you think you've seen it all, someone brings in a charm-steaded staff. It's not for farming, it's for ritual. It's topped with tiny iron birds, each twisted into impossible spirals. To help the rain come, someone murmurs beside you. No one laughs. The forge crackles, and a breeze shifts through the doorway, carrying with it the scent of iron, smoke, and palm oil. You close your eyes for a moment. The hiss of the bellows becomes a heartbeat. The hammer a lullaby. And somewhere in the darkness, a blade cools beside an ember, waiting for its first use. The air is thicker now, spiced with a raw scent of scorched earth and charcoal dust. You're crouched near a clearing where the forge sits like a beast asleep, its round clay belly cracked and soot-streaked, its mouth dark, waiting to be fed. A boy arrives with a basket strapped to his back, every step shifting the heavy weight by of red rocks. They aren't just any rocks. This is iron ore, pulled from the ground by hand, with no machines, no drills, just patience, muscle, and a good sense of which veins might sing when heated. You follow him back through a narrow trail, ducking beneath branches, stepping over thick roots. The mine isn't some yawning industrial cabots, more like a scar in the land, a slope dug out by generations with wooden tools and stone hammers. The miners chant as they work, not out of joy necessarily, but to keep rhythm. You get the sense they're talking to the earth, negotiating with it. Please give. We need. We respect. Just a little more. Historians still debate whether these mining techniques spread through trade networks or emerged independently in different zones. What we do know, some of the oldest bloomery furnaces designed to reduce or into usable metal have been found across West Africa, dating back over 2,000 years, from Termit in Niger to Nsukka in southeastern Nigeria. Evidence shows smelting wasn't some newfangled technology, it was already tradition. You pause beside one of those clay furnaces, low to the ground, shaped like a squat drum. It's surrounded by debris, hammerstones, broken tongs, worn-out bellows made from animal hide, and nearby the remnants of charcoal pits because, of course, you can't melt metal with plain firewood. The smiths first had to make charcoal, burning hardwoods slowly underground to create the high heat fuel needed to reach iron's melting point. So yes, before even one blade was shaped, entire forests, furnaces, and fuel cycles had to be orchestrated. And no, you couldn't skip steps unless you were in the mood to accidentally explode a furnace. Spoiler, many did. The blacksmith returns now, stepping lightly. He presses his palm against the furnace while it's warm, ready. He nods at the boy who starts pumping the bellows to watch the air funnel through to narrow clay tubes, feeding oxygen into the base of the chamber. A glow appears, faint at first, then pulsing orange, like a heart awakening dot. One curious detail. In many cultures, the bellows were seen as symbolic. Wombs. Seriously. The air pushing into the fire mimicked the breath of life, and smiths were seen almost like midwives of transformation, pulling iron babies from the fire. Kind of poetic, right? Unless you're the one getting burned. Nearby, a second blacksmith older. His hair streaked with grey prepares the charge. That's the technical term for layering iron ore and charcoal inside the furnace. He sprinkles a bit of powdery ash on top, whispers something you don't catch, and steps back. Ritual, habit, or maybe a little of both. Now comes the long wait. For hours, the bellows keep huffing, the fire rages, and the furnace glows. You sit in the red-washed twilight, swatting away mosquitoes and wondering how anyone figured this out. In the first place, I mean, really. Who looked at a rusty rock and thought, if I cook this hot enough and beat it repeatedly, I'll get something useful. That's not trial and error. That's borderline obsession. There's an odd moment of stillness before the first extraction. The furnace cracks open slightly, and with tongs the blacksmith reaches in not blindly, but with practiced trust. He draws out a lump of glowing, spongy metal. It looks like a half-melted loaf of bread, steaming and hissing, covered in bits of slag. Not much to look at. But it's iron, real, usable iron. It has to be worked quickly. The smith places it on a nearby anvil. A stone slab, pitted from years of strike sand, begins to hammer. Sparks leap into the air. The metal flattens, folding and twisting, and you watch, eyes wide, as this raw hunk starts to take shape. A narrow blade, a farming tool, a chisel, perhaps. Here's something you didn't expect. It smells like blood and rust and damp soil, metallic and oddly alive. The hammering continues, tink, tink, THWAC, and you feel it in your chest like a slow drumbeat. It's both calming and unnerving, like watching surgery in the open. And just when you think things are getting too intense, a chicken struts by, entirely uninterested in the miracle of metallurgy happening 6 inches from its feet. Bend, a reminder that here, this magic is ordinary, daily, unremarkable, and revered, all at once. Quirky fact. In some regions, women were forbidden to even look at a forge while it was active, lest their gaze soften the iron. In others, women played key roles in ore collection and charcoal making. Go figure. The smith finally stops, wipes his brow, and plunges the blade into a barrel of thick, dark oil. It hisses violently. The air smells like burnt peanuts and fire. This is quenching, the sudden cooling that hardens the blade and locks. In its new shape, one wrong move, and it shatters like glass. But not tonight. You pick up the tool once it's cooled. It's surprisingly light, sharp-edged, but not dangerous. Not yet. You turn it in your hand and feel the weight of work, of land cleared, of yams unearthed and soil turned. It's more than a blade. It's a promise, a beginning. The fire burns. Blow now. The bellows wheeze to a stop, and the smith, without ceremony, picks up a jug of water and pours it over the base of the furnace. Steam rises. The day's work is done. Tomorrow, it begins again. You lie back, eyes heavy, ears ringing, faintly with the echo of metal on stone. The forge sleeps once more, but under your skin. The pulse of iron still hums. The forge may have cooled for the night, but your journey continues, just a short walk away through the village paths, where every twist of the trail carries the soft thud of footsteps and the metallic jingle of tools hanging from door frames. You're headed to the blacksmiths' compound, not just a workshop, but a miniature kingdom within the community, where the hammer is law and the anvil is nothing less than a throne. You arrive to find not chaos, but calm hierarchy. The space is earned deliberately huts, forming a crescent around a courtyard, with the forge itself positioned like a sacred hearth at the center. Chickens scratch nearby. A child chases a goat in a slow circle, and beside it all, the blacksmith sits cross-legged, sharpening a curved blade with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgeons or chess champions. But here's the surprising twist. This man might be more influential than the village chief. In many West African societies, especially among the Yoruba, the Dogon, and the Monda-speaking peoples, the blacksmith was a pillar of power, often placed just beneath, or even equal to rulers and priests, not because he was flashy or wealthy, but because he held something nobody else did. The knowledge to shape raw earth into survival. Without him, the chief had no tools. The farmers had no hoes. The warriors had no blades. The musicians had no bells. You get the idea. Historians still argue whether this reverence came more from the smith's spiritual significance or his practical monopoly on metallurgy. Probably both. But in either case, the forge was a kind of secular temple, and the smith its high priest. You notice something funny. Despite his status, the blacksmith isn't ostentatious. He wears no gold, just a worn wrapper tied at the waist, hands blackened with soot, fingernails etched with years of mineral dust. But when he stands, people pause. Children go silent. Elders nod. Even the village dogs slink aside like they know better. Among the Yoruba, blacksmiths were sometimes consulted by Orba kings before decisions were made. Not officially, of course, but quietly, over a pot of palm wine. Will the gods favor this path? The ruler might ask. The blacksmith wouldn't answer right away. He'd stir the coals, test a blade's edge, maybe mumble something about the temperature of the metal. Then strike now. The fire is ready. A decision made. And among the Monde, the Numu smiths were part of an entire caste system. Their position secured by tradition and bloodline. They trained only their children or their kin, kept their techniques secret, and acted as cultural glue. Mediators in disputes, designers of initiation tools, and creators of sacred masks weren't just hammering metal. They were hammering out peace treaties and community rituals. That old joke about someone being a jack of all trades. It kind of originated here, but the smith was a master of every single one. Oh, and if you're wondering whether all this power went to their heads, well, sometimes. One oral tale from Molly tells of a blacksmith who refused to repair a nobleman's spear unless he was given a goat, 2 baskets of cola nuts, and the man's daughter in marriage. Did he get it? The story doesn't say, but the spear definitely stayed broken. You sit for a while in the compound, watching as the smith directs a few apprentices. One's grinding a blade on a stone slab. Another's fanning a new fire. A third is drawing a pattern into wax for a mold. There's no shouting, no panic, just steady rhythm. A pace older than time. A strange little fact. In some cultures, blacksmiths were forbidden from being buried like ordinary people. They were sometimes laid to rest inside hollowed-out trees, or near riverbanks, away from others either, to honor their sacred role, or to prevent their spirit from meddling with the living. Depends who you ask. And speaking of spirits, you notice a small iron charm hanging above the forge. It's shaped like a lizard, coiled and watchful, to keep bad spirits from jumping into the flames. Someone whispers, you don't laugh. You just nod as dusk stretches its fingers across the compound. You see villagers begin to arrive not for weapons, but for advice. One woman needs a new farming blade, but also wants to know if her late husband's spirit is at peace. The blacksmith listens. Another man brings his broken hand. a marriage proposal wrapped in nervous grins. The smith examines the hoe, cracks a tiny smile, and says, "If this can be fixed, so can you." This isn't customer service. It's communion. In a sense, the blacksmith's forge is the village's second heart, the first being the well. From one comes water, from the other iron, and both must be tended with care, because if either runs dry, the entire rhythm of life falters. You lie back near the anvil as the sky darkens and the stars sharpen overhead. The forge is quiet for now, but tomorrow the dance will start again. The bellows will wheeze, the metal will hiss, and the anvil will sing. And beneath it all, a man with fire in his hands and history in his bones will keep shaping a world that never stops needing him. The coals are quiet for now, but the legacy burns on. You stir beneath the stars, blinking at the gentle clink of metal somewhere in the distance, a sound that never entirely disappears in a smith's village. You rise slowly, stretching your legs as you wander into the memory of a ceremony you've only just heard whispers of. Today, it's not tools or weapons being made, it's a rite, a passage, a kind of alchemy where community and metallurgy intertwine like strands in a woven mat. You follow a narrow trail to the edge of the village, where a semicircle of stones marks the ceremonial ground. At the center sits an unusual forge knot, functional, not burning, but symbolic, decorated with ash, feathers, and scraps of iron bent into deliberate shapes, crescent moons, spirals, snakes. You feel a hush settle over your skin, as if the very ground is holding its breath. A young boy kneels nearby, eyes wide, chest painted with charcoal. Today is his initiation, not into adulthood, not yet, but into knowledge, specifically into the blacksmith's circle. He's not holding a hammer, he's holding silence. That's the first test across West Africa, particularly among the Dogon and Bamana people. Blacksmiths were the guardians of sacred knowledge. Some even believed they were the first humans created by the gods' descendants of celestial smiths, who forged not only tools, but stars, rivers, and time itself. Historians still debate whether these myths emerged as symbolic metaphors or actual oral cosmologies. Either way, they carried weight. You watch as an elder stooped, barefoot, wrapped in red steps forward. He holds a blade, not to harm, but to demonstrate. He passes it over a bowl of water, letting drops fall from the edge, then plunges it into the earth. Metal has memory, he murmurs. What you give it, it holds. And just like that, the ritual begins. The young boy is lead forward. He's not asked to strike anything yet. Instead, he's told to sit, to listen, to observe. Because in this world, the first skill isn't strength, it's stillness. That's something modern folks could probably use more of. When's the last time you learned something by just sitting and watching? No multitasking, no podcasts in your ears, just being present. The Smiths have known this for centuries. Before you can shape metal, you must shape yourself. A quirky detail. Some communities had blacksmith origin myths involving animals. One Dogon tale speaks of a primordial blacksmith who learned his craft by watching a crocodile strike the water with its tail, creating ripples. That rhythm, that force, became the model for hammering metal. So yes, next time you're floating down a river and spot a croc, maybe don't just paddle away in fear. That guy might be your ancient metallurgy professor. You lean in as the ritual continues. The elder draws shapes in the dirt, a triangle for fire, a circle for breath, a jagged line for transformation. These aren't doodles, they're coded lessons. In the smith's world, everything has a metaphor. The fire doesn't just melt iron, it reveals truth. The hammer doesn't just strike, it corrects. The anvil isn't a tool, it's resistance made visible. Historians believe these initiation ceremonies served not only to train new smiths, but to guard secrets. Metallurgy wasn't just technical, it was political. If everyone knew how to make weapons or farming tools, who would hold the power? So the knowledge was rationed, taught slowly, and always with ritual. You feel the heat even though there's no fire. It's in the eyes of the boy now, who's been given a pair of tongs and asked to hold them. Not use them, just hold them. Get used to their weight, their awkwardness, because in blacksmithing, as in life, you don't rush into control. You start by learning to carry. The village hums in the background. Drums sound not loud, but insistent. A heartbeat, a reminder that something important is happening. You glance up and see women gathered in a crescent beyond the ritual space. Their role isn't passive. In many cultures, women participated in the crafting process, especially in charcoal making, sand gathering, even bellows pumping. Some even worked iron themselves, though not always in the public eye. The line between inclusion and exclusion shifted with time and region. But tonight, their presence here feels essential, like they are anchoring the moment, providing witness, providing balance. A funny anecdote from oral law. One tale from the Mossy people tells of a woman who became the village's best blacksmith, not because she was strong, but because she could sing to the fire and it listened. Her tools never broke, her blades never rusted, and even her rivals, grumbling into their furnaces, had to admit, yeah, okay, she's better than us. Now the boy steps forward again. This time he's handed a chunk of iron cold, raw, unworked. He must carry it around the ceremonial space, circling the forge 3 times. Each lap he recites a phrase. I walk with fire. I speak with stone. I do not forget. It sounds simple, but his voice trembles. Not from fear, but from something deeper reverence. A realization, maybe, that this isn't just about learning to make hoes or knives. It's about becoming something else, a vessel of transformation. You watch the last lap. His steps are steadier now. The crowd leans forward, and as he finishes, the elder steps aside, nodding toward the forge. It's lit not for smelting, but symbol, a flicker, a flame, a future. The boy kneels again, hands open, eyes closed. The smithhood has begun. You step back into the shadows as the drums taper off. The air cools. The stars press overhead like 1,000 glowing embers. And in the center of this sleepy village, one small fire carries centuries of weight. You wake just before dawn, stirred by the slow crackle of rekindled flame. The forge is coming alive again, not with ceremony this time, but with daily work, practical, rhythmic, essential. Make your way through the village, past sleeping goats and yawning elders, to find a young apprentice crouched at the edge of the fire, coaxing embers like they're shy animals. He doesn't notice you at first. His eyes are locked on the glow dot. Today is all about the work itself, what's made, how it's made, and the quiet genius behind each swing of the hammer. Because, despite what movies tell you, blacksmithing isn't just brute force and dramatic sparks flying into slow motion. It's closer to baking a perfect loaf of bread. It's timing, it's temperature, it's chemistry without goggles and magic without potions. The apprentice you're watching is preparing a blade. But before that can even happen, he's smelting. And that's not just tossing a rock into fire and waiting. No. This starts days earlier with gathering the right iron ore, mixing the proper clay for the furnace, creating airflow with handmade bellows, often crafted from wood, leather, and occasionally animal bladders. Yes, you heard that right. And that's your quirky tidbit of the hour in some regions. Bellows were made using goatskin stitched around hollow bones. Not exactly what you'd find on a Home Depot shelf. But it worked. And let's be honest, Hugh, you're operating a fire hotter than lava, using goat organs and pure ingenuity. You deserve a little extra respect. Once the fire is burning hot enough, sometimes up to 200 degrees Celsius, the apprentice begins feeding the ore into the furnace. This process, called bloomery smelting, doesn't melt the iron completely, but rather softens it, separating usable metal from slag. It's dirty, dangerous, and delicate all at once. And here's where historians argue again. How did these early smiths know what to do without thermometers, pressure gauges, or science labs? Some say it was trial and error passed down orally. Others suggest a kind of intuitive science and knowledge base built on generations of pattern recognition. They knew how the fire should sound at the right temperature, how the smoke should smell, how the metal should bend. Not data points, but instincts, the kind you can't teach in textbooks. As the bloom is extracted and hammered, you notice the technique. Smiths didn't just wail away at hot lumps of metal. Each strike was part of a choreography, a push here, a fold there, a quick water dip, then more hammering. It's called forging, and it's why your blade doesn't snap like a twig. The first time you use it, you move closer, catching sight of the tools. Many are handmade, two chisels, tongs, hammers, all crafted by the blacksmith himself. That's a rule in some smithing traditions. Never use another person's tools, not out of ego, but energy. Each tool carries the rhythm of its maker, and a mismatch can disrupt everything. It's a bit like trying to write poetry using someone else's handwriting. And oh, the variety of items made here. You'd be surprised. It's not all swords and daggers. In fact, warfare was often the least frequent reason for forging. Most of the day-to-day blacksmithing focused on plow tips, sickles, fishhooks, spearheads for hunting, not war, and intricate iron jewelry. Bracelets twisted like vines, anklets shaped like bird wings. Beauty mattered, even in function. Among the Aiken people, for example, blacksmiths created gold-weight steiny, ornate iron or brass figures used to measure currency in the bustling trade markets. Some were shaped like animals, others like proverbs. One might show a crocodile with two pairs, symbolizing that greed between partners leads to destruction. So, yeah, the next time your scale at the grocery store annoys you, just be grateful it doesn't come with a life lesson. The smell of iron hits your nose, now sharp, earthy, and strangely clean. It mixes with the scent of wood smoke and morning dew, creating a cocktail of tradition. The kind of scent that sticks to your skin and tells people where you've been. Forge perfume, one elder once joked, and beneath it all is that steady soundtrack. Tap, 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 pause, tap. Smiths don't rush. They don't scream at their metal. They coax it, like a whisper to stone, like a lullaby to a dot. Now the apprentice is shaping a blade, a small sickle meant for harvesting millet. The curve must be precise. Too wide, and it won't cut cleanly. Too narrow, and it breaks. He lines up the edge, reheats, cools, reheats again. You'd think it'd take minutes, but it takes hours. Patience is part of the craft. Another historian once wrote that African blacksmiths were technologists without writing, which is just a fancy way of saying they were engineers who never needed blueprint. They built kilns, designed alloys, experimented with cooling times and impact strengthal with nothing but fire, clay, and memory. You pause, realizing that what you're seeing isn't just labor, it's culture preserved in flame. Every tool that leaves the forge carries not just function, but intention. It reflects a worldview where nothing is disposable, where every object has meaning, and where craftsmanship is the highest form of respect. The blade is nearly done. The apprentice sets it aside, cooling it in a pot of thick, dark oil made from crushed seeds. This isn't just for temperature. It's a finish, a seal, a protection. Kind of like when you moisturize after a long day, but for iron. He wipes the sweat from his brow, and for a moment you lock eyes. He doesn't smile, he just nods. A quiet yes to everything you've just witnessed. Behind him, the forge breathes again. By mid-morning, the village is humming. Blacksmiths hard at work, children chasing chickens, women weaving under baobab shade. But something in the air feels different today. You sense it in the way people glance over their shoulders, in the way the drumbeat has shifted from background rhythm to something sharper. Not panic, no, just alertness. Because word has come from the edge of the forest. A traveler approaches. You follow the murmurs toward the forge again, where the master blacksmith, his beard silver, his hands dark and strong, is rubbing oil into a finished axe head. He doesn't stop working, even when the messenger arrives. panting, dusty, wide-eyed. "Stranger from the east," he says, pointing toward the winding forest path, carrying iron, strange iron. Now that's enough to make any blacksmith pause. And so begins the story of how traveling smiths, wandering craftsmen from neighboring regions or distant cultures helped reshape local blacksmithing traditions across West Africa, not through conquest or domination, but through quiet collaboration and subtle challenge. You join the crowd gathering near the village edge as the stranger arrives. He's younger than expected, wearing iron rings on each finger, his robe dyed with unfamiliar patterns. Strapped to his back is a bundle of tool stones, chisels, something that looks suspiciously like a curved blade with holes drilled through the hilt. It's not the style from this village. It's not even from this region. You squint. That's foreign iron. Throughout history, blacksmiths didn't just stay put. Some traveled across empires, through Sahelian trade networks, following the great arteries of exchange, the Niger River, the salt roads, the camel trails. They brought not only tools and techniques, but ideas. And just like a new seasoning in an old stew, those ideas sometimes transformed everything. The master blacksmith steps forward. No words, just a long, assessing look. Then, with a nod, he beckons the visitor inside the forge. It's not hospitality, it's invitation, a challenge. Show me what you know. Inside, the two men move like mirrors, testing each other's pace, comparing methods. The visitor reveals a folding technique, unfamiliar here, more elegant, less wasteful. The local master shows how to temper a blade, using ash-packed pits that retain heat better than open-air cooling. Back and forth they go, teaching without teaching, because that's how smiths talk, not with voices, but with tools. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were spontaneous, like jazz sessions between improvisers, or organized through guilds or caste networks. In some regions, like among the Monde, smiths formed hereditary guilds that could stretch across kingdoms, maintaining a shared language of metallurgy and ritual. Elsewhere, such networks were looser built on marriage alliances, friendship, or even shared dreams. Yes, some blacksmiths claimed to receive forging techniques in dreams passed down from ancestors. But what's clear is this: knowledge moved, techniques evolved, and ironwork became one of the earliest truly Pan-African technologies customized in every village, yet connected across thousands of miles. You sit in a corner of the forge, barely breathing as the visitor begins to craft. He's not making a weapon. He's crafting a bell. That's right, a bell. Small, conical, hollow. It rings out as he taps its surface, shaping the pitch. You expect a sharp clang. Instead, it hums, deep, almost musical, among the Yoruba and Igbo peoples. Blacksmiths often made ritual bells used in dances, ceremonies, or to summon spirits. And each bell had its own voice, shaped not just by size and shape, but by the blacksmith's mood, materials, even the temperature on the day it was made. One story tells of a bell so perfectly tuned It was said to call rain when struck 3 times in the morning. Superstition. Maybe, but you don't dismiss it. Not after what you've seen. The bell is done. The visitor hands it to the local master. No words again, just a look, a small nod. The elder lifts it, rings it once. The sound cuts through the morning buzz like a whisper turned sideways. It's not better. It's not worse. It's different. And in the world of smithing, that difference is gold. The visitor is offered cola nuts, a place to sit, a gourd of thick millet beer. Not just as thanks, but as contract. He's now part of this forge's story. For however long he stays, he will teach and learn, blend and build. Because in this world, knowledge isn't hoarded. It's shared, slowly, with fire and steel. And here's a funny footnote. In some regions, visitors were tested, not with forges, but with riddles. What eats stone and drinks wind, but never grows fat? Answer correctly, and you get the good. Firewood. Miss it. You're stuck pumping the bellows till dusk. So you see, even in knowledge exchange, there was wit. There was ceremony. There was depth. The sun climbs higher now. The forge crackles. The village murmurs return to their rhythm. And you, lucky traveler that you are, have just witnessed a moment that might never be recorded in books, but lives by on in every sickle that glides, every bell that chimes, and every blacksmith who dares to listen as much as they strike. You rise with the sound of grinding metal and distant drumming, each pulse echoing from the communal square like a heartbeat, passed through earth and fire. But today, the focus shifts from individual skill to something even grander, the blacksmith as a builder of bonds. Because in West Africa, forging wasn't just about making things. It was about making people, making relationships, making communities. And it all starts with status. You walk past the open forge toward the center of the village, where a half-circle of elders is gathered under a tree, watching a pair of youths circle each other in a mock wrestling match. The master blacksmith is there too, seated slightly apart, not because he's less welcome, but because his position is both part of and separate from the community. A paradox with a hammer dot in many West African societies. Among the Monde, the Dogon, the Sunink, and others, blacksmiths occupied a unique social niche. Not elite like kings or chiefs, not common like herders or farmers, but set apart. They were feared, respected, and sometimes even avoided. Why? Because they knew how to tame fire. Because they turned stone into strength. Because they altered nature itself. You could say they were the original influencers, except instead of tic-tacs, they dropped anvils. And here's your mainstream fact of the hour. In the Monday world, blacksmiths belonged to a hereditary caste called the New. That word didn't just mean metal worker. It meant shaper, both literal and spiritual. If you needed a hoe, a knife, a shield, you went to a Numu. But also, if you needed a marriage negotiated, a curse lifted, a ritual interpreted, you might go to them too. Historians still argue whether this power came purely from skill, or if it was woven from older spiritual beliefs that saw iron working as sacred. But one thing is certain. The new Mu were central to how communities function, grew, and held together. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some blacksmiths refused to shake hands, not out of rudeness, but to preserve the heat in their panzers. Spiritual charge they believed could be depleted or transferred. Imagine explaining that during a job interview. Back in the square, a girl approaches the elders. She's carrying a small iron bracelet shaped like a snake eating its tail, a gift for her friend's coming-of-age ceremony. This isn't just jewelry, it's a message. The shape signifies renewal, and guess who made it? The village blacksmith, of course. His hands embedded not just metalwork, but meaning. Blacksmiths were often the quiet linguists of symbol. They encoded stories in blade shapes, family histories in anklets, social status in the curve of a spearhead. One could read a person's life in the tools they carried, tools crafted in the dim glow of the forge. In some cultures, the forge itself was sacred space. Pregnant women wouldn't enter. Fighters wouldn't draw weapons there. And newborns sometimes had iron pieces placed near their cradles to ward off spirit. Iron wasn't just hard, it was holy. You duck into a small hut on the village edge, where the blacksmith's wife is sorting charms. Yes, charms. Because forging extended beyond metal. Some blacksmiths also worked with bone, leather, even herbs. They were part doctor, part engineer, part sorcerer. And while not every smith embraced this mystical side, enough did that the association stuck. Among the Dogon people of Mali, blacksmiths even helped with funerals, building the iron tools needed to prepare the body and guiding the rituals with chants older than memory. One elder once said, "A blacksmith is the only one who speaks to fire and hears answers." You smile because that feels true. Now, you make your way to the riverbank, where a new forge is being built, not a replacement in expansion. Because the village is growing. A marriage between two clans has brought new families, and with them, new smithing needs. This is when the blacksmith's role shifts from solitary craftsman to community architect. He doesn't just make tools, he decides which ones the farmers need first. He doesn't just design jewelry, he shapes it to merge two traditions. He builds iron, foundations beneath family ties. You see him now, showing children how to hammer copper into thin shapes using stones. No fire, just technique. They laugh when it bends wrong. He doesn't correct them harshly. He just lets them try again. Because he knows what you forge is not just metal, but memory. And remember that visitor from before. He's still here, helping set up the new forge. He's adjusting to the local techniques, blending his foreign iron ideas into the mix. It's not competition, it's collaboration. A quiet merging of sparks. You take one last look at the village. The drums have shifted against lower now, more grounded. And somewhere a bell rings 3 times. Maybe to mark a meal. Maybe to call a meeting. Or maybe just because the forge is happy today. Either way, the message is clear in this village, and in many like it across centuries. Blacksmiths didn't just shape tools. They shaped how people lived, how they celebrated, how they connected. With every spark, they stitched a community tighter. With every strike, they wrote a chapter of human belonging. And with every quiet nod from the forge, they reminded everyone that strong things, traditions, homes are all forged the same way. Slowly, in heat, with care, the day drifts into golden afternoon, and you follow the long shadows as they stretch behind clay walls and iron-smudged doorframes. There's a sense of peace here, but not idleness. Never that a rhythm hums through the village, slow but constant, and beneath it a quieter melody persists, the whisper of ancestors, the murmur of history, the clink of iron on stone. It's in this warmth that you start to understand. A blacksmith's forge wasn't just a workspace, was a memory palace, built from flame and repetition. As you trail behind a group of boys carrying bundles of charcoal toward the forge, one of them grins at you and mutters something that translates loosely to, "You'll never forget the smell." He's not wrong. The scent of burning wood and oiled iron becomes something you carry with you forever, like a memory etched behind your teeth. And that's the point of today's journey, because beyond tools and rituals, beyond politics and status, blacksmiths in West Africa served as keepers of memory, not through writing, but through craft. Each object they made was a recorded time stamp, a cultural imprint, a silent story forged in fire. Let's start with the tools. That hoe you saw earlier. It's more than a blade. Its curve, thickness, and grip reveal the region it comes from, the soil it's meant to cut, even the belief systems of its users. Among the Tiv people of Nigeria, certain farming tools were only used during specific moon phases, not because of superstition, but because of ancestral guidance passed down through smithing lines. Every hammer strike carried echoes of that ancestral voice, and sometimes, literally. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some blacksmithing families, oral history was preserved not just in speech, but in sound patterns. A master smith might teach their apprentice to strike metal in a specific rhythm, mimicking a traditional drum pattern that told a story like a battle, or a migration, or a famous trial. So when tools rang out in the forge, they weren't just being made, they were retelling. You duck inside a low shed near the forge, where older smiths keep rarely used or ceremonial tools. One wall is hung with strange iron-shaped looped hooks, serpentine coils, star-headed hammers. They look more symbolic than practical. And you're right, these are ancestral replicas, kept not for function but for remembrance. They tell of the original smith who brought fire to the village. They stand for the day the river was tamed with iron stakes. One tool even represents a flooded's edge, warped to show where the water changed the metal's path. Historians still argue whether these preserved objects were always meant to be mnemonic devices, or whether they simply took on meaning over generations. But either way, the effect is real. They bind the present to the past like threads through a quilt. No need for scrolls or ink, just steel and silence. And memory wasn't only stored in tools, it lived in ritual. Take, for example, the first fire ceremony, still practiced in some blacksmithing lineages, when a new apprentice lights their own forge for the first time. They must use embers from their master's hearts, sometimes kept glowing for decades. It's not just symbolic, it's genealogical, that flame carries DNA. Or consider the apprenticeship. Oaths, whispered at night, offered under starlight, spoken over iron dust mixed with water and sipped like tea. One elder in Burkina Faso once described it like this: when you drink the forge, it remembers you. You step outside again, and the world feels a little different. The afternoon breeze carries the clang of metal, but this time it sounds like conversation. You realize that what blacksmiths pass down isn't just knowledge. It's methodical memory, craft as chronicle, steel as story. Near the village edge, a group of women prepare for a festival. They lay out ornate iron jewelry, bangles, anklets, necklaces shaped like birds mid-flight. You lean in. These pieces aren't modern, they're heirlooms, worn by grandmothers, then mothers, now daughters. Their designs mark clan identities, regional alliances, even secret lovers. If you read the motifs right, and the smith who made them, he didn't just hammer shapes. He encoded relationships. That coiled pattern, it's only used by families. Trace their line to the hill of 3 fires. That arrow motif, a nod to a peace treaty made 2 generations ago. The iron is a ledger, if you know how to read. One woman catches you studying her anklet and smiles. She lifts it and points to bed, a faint nick in the band. My grandmother, she says, danced too close to the fire. It's not just an imperfection, it's a story. A scar turned sacred, and suddenly you remember something earlier. You passed the blade near the forge that was oddly curved at the tip. Not a mistake, a memory. Forged in the forge, then, is more than a workplace. It's a library, but one that burns instead of shelves. Each tool, each spark, a word, each clang, a sentence. And blacksmiths, they are the quiet scribes of their people, transcribing not with pens but with flame and rhythm. So you walk back to the forge now, heart beating in time with the hammer. And as the master smith lifts his tool and strikes again, you realize the past is not gone. It's still glowing, still hot, still shaping you. Because in West Africa, the blacksmith never forgets. And as long as fire burns, the village remembers. 2. The twilight edges in slowly, the sun dripping behind thatched roofs and casting long bronze shadows. You feel it the moment when the day exhales and the air begins to still. But the forge, it stays awake. The glow from within the clay, hot flickers against the walls like a heartbeat, steady and patient. This is when blacksmiths often do their quietest work, not because of superstition, but because night reveals details. In this soft, silvery hush, we shift to a question few ever ask aloud. How did blacksmiths pass on their knowledge? It wasn't through books. You won't find dusty scrolls in these huts. You'll find hands calloused, scarred, precise hands and eyes that never stop watching. In West African blacksmithing culture, the forge was a classroom, and mentorship was everything. You peek through the doorway, and there it is, a young apprentice, no older than 13, mimicking his elders' every move with a piece of cool, scrap metal. He holds his body just like the master, same elbow angle, same shoulder tilt. He's not striking yet, just practicing posture. You want to laugh, but also you get it. In this world, before you learn to hit the metal, you must learn how to stand with it. Mainstream fact for this stretch: apprenticeships could last from 5 to 15 years, depending on the complexity of the craft and the customs of the ethnic group. For the Bamana and Dogon peoples, for example, smiths trained not only in metallurgy, but also in spiritual rituals, herbal medicine, and sometimes even diplomacy. Learning the trade meant learning the world. And here's your fringe tidbit. In some villages, the forge was treated as a living being. Before training began, the apprentice would greet the forge, bow to it, and offer cola nuts or a splash of millet beer. If the flame flared favorably, it meant the forge accepted them. If it sputtered, better luck tomorrow. There are no lecture halls here, no quizzes, just rhythm and repetition. The elder smith explains little with words, but everything with motion. You notice how he tests the heat of the iron knot with instruments, but with a faint hiss, a sniff of the air, or the shade of orange in the glow. He knows that iron tells you things, if you're patient enough to listen. Historians still debate whether blacksmithing knowledge was deliberately kept secret from outsiders, or if it just looked like secrecy due to the sheer complexity and nuance of the work. The truth is probably both. A master blacksmith might teach his sons, nephews, or chosen students every detail of the craft, but rarely all at once. Some techniques were revealed only after years of quiet observation and proven loyalty. That's why many apprentices started with the most humble tasks: fanning the bellows, crushing charcoal, fetching water. Tasks that seemed dull, even punishing. But there's a quiet genius in it, because by doing those chores, the apprentice learns how long a fire needs to burn before it speaks, how the coals change color when ready, how humidity changes the way metal sings. In a way, it's like learning a lullaby by sweeping the nursery. You wander behind the forge where several boys are trying to craft nails. Not decorative ones, just sturdy, clean, functional pegs for a roof beam. But the nails keep turning crooked. One of them groans and mutters something that loosely means, "Even nails are proud." You chuckle. He's not wrong. The master walks over and says nothing. He just picks up the hammer and drives one clean, sharp strike. The nail is perfect. The boys stare. He gestures once. Your turn. It's not harsh. It's not even strict. It's ritualized in centuries old and still effective. One of the apprentices tells you he'll be assigned his first blade next week. Not to keep, but to fail at. His voice trembles a little when he says it, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because here's the truth. Your first blade isn't supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to teach you humility. A blacksmith learns early that you don't shape iron with ego. You shape it with patience and repeat failure. Later that night, an elder tells you a story while rubbing a blade smooth with a pumice stone. Long ago, he says, a young smith got too proud and tried to build a blade without permission. The metal peas lodged in his arm. They say his blood turned rust red for the rest of his life, a sign that knowledge stolen is knowledge cursed. Of course, he laughs after. Probably didn't clean his tools. Still, the lesson lands by now. The air is thick with the scent of ash and iron. A warm fatigue settles over the village, and you realize the teaching never really stops. Even sleep is part of the learning cycle. Apprentices are told to dream of the forge, to listen for what the flames whisper in their rest. Superstition, maybe, but imagine waking up with a new idea that came from a dream. In a world where oral knowledge is precious, sleep becomes a lecture hall to dot the forge dims, banked for the night. The apprentices wash their hands with clay, water another lesson, this time in humility and respect. One boy stays behind, polishing a flawed piece of work. You can't see his face, but the way he holds it says everything. He knows it's not good, but he's proud of trying. The next one will be better. That's how the cycle moves. So as you step back from the forge, feet dusty, thoughts warm, you carry this with you. Blacksmiths didn't teach with chalk or exams. They taught by firelight. They passed down skills through sweat, through mistakes, through quiet trust that the student will one day surpass the master. And when that day comes, the new master will look at his apprentice, hand him a crooked nail, and say nothing, because the lesson's already begun. You wake to a quiet hush before dawn, when the village is held in that silvery pause between darkness and light. The forge hasn't stirred yet, but you feel its presence like a sleeping animal, warm and waiting. The air smells faintly of ash and rain-wet soil, and somewhere nearby, a rooster coughs out a confused attempt at a crow. But today, the stillness tolls something else. Anticipation, because today, the village blacksmith will begin work on something rare, a ceremonial piece, not a hoe or a knife or an ordinary tool. Today's commission is for a staff of a fissa, symbol of leadership, sacred and socially binding. The sort of object that doesn't just exist, but means something. This is where we dig deeper into blacksmithing, not as craft, but as culture-maker. You follow the smith as he steps barefoot into the work area. No announcements, no flourishes, just a quiet nod to the coals, and the process begins. But this isn't any old forging. He starts by speaking to the iron, a prayer whispered, a greeting soft. You can't catch the full meaning, but it's something like, "Let your strength be our story." Here's your mainstream fact. In many West African societies, including the Yoruba, Akan and Mondatha, blacksmith was responsible for creating regalia used by chiefs, spiritual leaders, and warriors. These items included staffs, crowns, bracelets, and weapons of rank, often designed with layered symbols, spirals, birds, suns, and ancestral motifs, each shape communicating power, lineage, or divine favor, and those meanings not always fixed. That's the tricky part. Historians still debate whether these symbols had universally agreed upon meanings, or whether each village interpreted them through its own lens. A bird in one region might mean rebirth. In another, it means ancestral protection. In yet another, it might be a subtle dig at a rival chief known for flapping his mouth too much. Context, as always, is everything. The ceremonial staff being made today is for a new village elder, appointment that hasn't happened in over a decade. It's a big deal, and the blacksmith isn't just following orders. He's interpreting the elder's character, history, and even personal quirks into iron. The spiral at the top, that's for wisdom earned slowly. The jagged edge near the base, that's for the elder's temper, which everyone agrees is legendary, even if it's softened with age. And the hollow section near the grip, that's not a mistake. It's a memory space left open for the future. Yes, really, some blacksmiths incorporate voids on purpose, open segments that invite the stories yet to come. It's poetic, sure, but it's also practical. That gap can be filled later with beads, feathers, or cloth tied by future generations. So, in a way, today's stuff is unfinished by design. As the smith hammers out the shape, you notice how slow and deliberate each strike is. He's not just forming metal, he's measuring meaning. Behind him, an elder woman prepares dyes and charms. For later the smith may shape the staff, but others will bless it. It's a community act, like painting history onto a wall and then lighting incense before it. Your fringe tidbit for today, in parts of Guinea and Mali, certain blacksmith lineages were known to encode jokes or subtle critiques into ceremonial objects. An overly proud chief might receive a bracelet shaped slightly too tight, or a peace staff might bear a small snake carved on the underside and side joke, referencing the chief's slippery past. Subtle, almost invisible satire like political cartoons in molten form. You sneak a peek at the emerging staff. It's tall, elegant, heavy, not designed to hit or dig, but to speak. And it will speak even in silence. When the elder walks with bit through the village, people will recognize the spiral, the gap, the curve at the base. They'll nod, smirk, remember. They'll interpret, argue, whisper. That's the magic of ceremonial ironwork. It starts conversations that last for generations. By midday, the staff is complete, but not yet alive. For that, it needs its naming. This ritual varies from village to village, but today's is simple. The smith holds the staff over a pot of burning herbs, while the elder Tubi says a few words in thanks to the forge, to the ancestors, to the iron itself. Then he gives it a name, Song of the Old River, and with that, the object takes on breath. The phrase ripples across the village. Children chant it, women murmur it while pounding grains. The name becomes a call signer, new code added to the communal lexicon. And every time that staff touches the ground, you can almost hear the river's voice humming back. This isn't blacksmithing as industry. This is blacksmithing as living language. The smith creates vocabulary the village didn't know it needed until now. Through iron, through silence, through art later that afternoon. You spot a collection of old ceremonial pieces tucked behind the shrine-some bent. Some rusted, some beautifully intact, but none discarded. Each is wrapped in cloth or buried partially in earth, like a sleeping elder, and each one still carries its name, whispered by those who remember. You crouch beside one, a blade shaped like a crescent moon. No inscription, just a faint sun symbol carved near the hilt. A girl walks past and says, "That one's called the last laugh." You ask why. She shrugs. Because the elder who carried it smiled even when losing arguments. Of course, P did so. As dusk pulls across the village, you realize something simple but profound. Ceremonial iron is never just for show. It's for memory, for myth, for mischief. A blacksmith doesn't just craft objects. He forges identity, frames narratives, and quietly, humorously shapes how history remembers. And you now walk a little differently, a little straighter, a little more aware of what you carry and what carries you. Because in West Africa, every piece of iron remembers who it was made for and why. A low drum beat carries on the breeze tonight, not loud, not festive, just enough to stir the memory. You follow it past the quiet huts, past a boy dozing with a half-mended drum on his lap, until you arrive at a small clearing lit by fireflies. Tell an old moonlight. Here the forge sits untouched, silent, but this time the hush feels different, not like sleep, more like reverence. Tonight you're stepping into a chapter where blacksmithing stops being a solitary act and becomes a bridge between communities, because here's the surprising truth. West African blacksmiths didn't just serve their own villages. They traveled, negotiated, advised. Some even became peace brokers. Iron may have been their trade, but relationships, that was their real currency. It starts with trust. A blacksmith from one village might be called to repair farming tools in another. You picture the journey feet wrapped in cloth, a leather satchel of charcoal and worn tools slung across his shoulder. He isn't announced like royalty, but people notice, eyes follow, children whisper, because his arrival might mean new tools, or a blade for an upcoming hunt, or perhaps news. Mainstream fact time. In many regions, particularly among the Monde and Sonic peoples, blacksmiths formed networks that spanned across kingdoms. These weren't just work trips, they were diplomatic missions. Smiths often carried information between rulers, settled disputes using their perceived neutrality, and sometimes even arranged marriages between clans. Yes, the guy who makes your axe could also smooth over a blood feud. And now your fringe tidbit. among the Lobi people of Burkina Faso. It's said that blacksmiths sometimes carried tiny iron messages, coded charms in the shape of animals or tools, gifted from one community to another as silent signals of intent. A curled snake might mean we come in caution. A twisted ladder, we seek elevation together. It's like sending a text emoji in solid metal. The ultimate read receipt. You crouch beside an elder who's rubbing his hands with shea butter, warming them near a fireless forge. He tells you how his grandfather once walked 3 days to forge a new plow for a rival village during a famine. They had food. His village had metal. The agreement? 1 blade, 2 bowls of millet per week. Put a season, no paperwork, just honor. That's the kind of economy we're in. Now not just barter, but social metallurgy. Every piece of iron passed between villages was a thread in a larger tapestry, and the blacksmith, he was the weaver. Historians still debate how formalized these blacksmithing networks really were. Some argue they functioned like early unions or guilds. Others believe they were looser kinship chains, maintained through marriage, initiation rites, and shared sacred lore. Either way, the results were clear. Borders blurred when iron moved freely, and the forges themselves adapted. In larger hubs, you might find a traveler's forge, smaller, portable, and set up in communal areas. These forges weren't for profit. They were for diplomacy. Sometimes multiple smiths would co-forge an item, each adding a mark or twist unique to their style, the finished piece. A symbol of alliance. You pause at one such item tucked behind a ceremonial drummond, iron spear with 4 distinct patterns along its spine. Bamana spirals, Fula wavelines, Dogon checker marks, and an Ashanti sunburst. It's not made for war. It's made to remind people that peace was forged here. Even social events had iron-coded messages. In some festivals, women would wear small iron hairpins forged by smiths from allied villages, a subtle way to say, our people stand with yours. Men might wear wrist cuffs that clinked in a shared rhythm during the harvest dance, reinforcing unspoken vows of cooperation. It wasn't just jewelry, it was silent diplomacy in motion. You feel it in your chest now, that rhythm. That intention behind the clang of metal and beat of the drum. It's all part of something bigger than any single tool or village. And yet, these relationships weren't always smooth. Rival blacksmiths existed. Techniques were sometimes jealously guarded. Disputes erupted over whether a certain curve in a hoe was a sign of innovation or insult. One tale you hear tells of 2 blacksmiths who spent an entire festival passively critiquing each other's work with fake praise. Ah, such bold asymmetry in your knife. So, ... unexpected. You can almost hear the shade. But even in rivalry, there was recognition, respect, a grudging understanding. That one forge's flame lit the path for another. You step back from the clearing and notice something curious. The path you came in on glints faintly in the dark. Embedded in the soil are slivers of iron knot by accident, but by design. Like breadcrumbs of history, you follow them and realize they trace the route between this forge and the next village over. A subtle reminder that every step on this earth is part of a larger map. Because in West Africa, blacksmiths didn't just connect metal to wood or fire to stone. They connected village to village, heart to heart, strike to strike. And as you lie down once more, the distant sound of a hammer returns, soft, deliberate, far away, not working, just reminding. The hammering has faded again. This time, it's not replaced by silence, but by singing low, layered, and oddly hypnotic. Not the polished kind you'd hear at a festival, but the communal hum of people who've done this for generations. You follow the sound through thick-leafed paths, past woven fences and drying laundry lines, until it leads you to the edge of something sacred, a grove, circular, tidy, suspended in a kind of hush, even though a dozen voices are rising in call, ban response, and in the middle, a forge, not the everyday work site, mind you. This one is special, surrounded by carved stones and fetishes wrapped in leather. There's an iron sculpture here too, placed purposefully, half lion, half snake, holding a bell. You've reached the spiritual heart of it, or the forge, where iron meets spirit. Because in West Africa, blacksmithing isn't just a job, it's a spiritual identity. And the forge itself, not just a tool, but a living shrine. Here's your mainstream history in numerous West African cultures, particularly among the Yoruba, Monde, and Awatha. Forge was considered sacred. Blacksmiths were thought to have been chosen by the gods or ancestors, and their work carried spiritual weight. The forge was often linked to deities like Ogun, the Yoruba god of iron, war, and transformation. Every strike of the hammer was both labor and liturgy, which is why this forge you're staring at now has offerings laid out beside it. Cola nuts, palm oil, feathers, sometimes even rum. Not for the smith, for the spirit of the forge. You take a seat at the edge of the grove as a smith begins to chant a knot, loudly, but with purpose. He mixes herbs in a shallow bowl, adds iron shavings, and sets the blend beside the coals. There's a small flame, barely visible, but everyone in the circle leans in as if the fire might speak. And maybe it does dot your fringe tidbit. Among the Dogon of Mali, it's believed that the first blacksmith descended from the sky, riding an anvil like a comet. According to their cosmology, he brought fire, iron, and music hall in one go. He didn't just make tools, he seeded the world's rhythm. That's why Dogon blacksmiths also serve as drummers and keepers of oral history. It makes sense, doesn't it? Fire, rhythm, memory. The forge contains them all. Now you watch as a young apprentice approaches the fire and adds his first offering. A simple iron nail, freshly made, still warm. He places it gently on the stone beside the fire, then steps back without a word. You learn this is his initiation moment. The community watches to see how he moves, how he breathes, whether the spirits of the forge acknowledge him. If the fire cracks or a bird calls nearby, some say it's a sign. Others say it's nonsense. But everyone watches. Historians still argue whether these initiations had fixed structures or were more symbolic, passed down orally with wide regional variation. Some records describe 7-day rituals involving fasting and silence. Others suggest it was as simple as gifting your first tool to the forge spirit and keeping a clean heart. But one thing's clear. The smith wasn't just a craftsman. He was a medium, and his forge was the altar. The ceremony continues with drum beats, now low and syncopated, not festive, more like breathing. One beat for the hammer, one for the anvil, one for the silence in between. You find yourself moving with it, even without meaning to, like your own body recognizes something older than your thoughts. And that's when the elder smith speaks not to the apprentice, but to the forge. He calls out a name, not his own, not a god's, but the name of an ancestor, the man who taught him, the one who taught the one before him. The lineage stretches back through time, each name resting on the last like cooled iron stacked beside a fire. The forge accepts the name. You can feel it. The fire flickers sideways, as if nodding. It's worth noting, many blacksmithing families in West Africa are hereditary. You're born into the trade. Not because it's easy, or because there are no other options, but because it's a calling. Refusing it wasn't always accepted. In some regions, you could be ostracized for abandoning your family's forge. In others, they'd just wait, patiently knowing the iron would call you back eventually. You reach out and touch one of the carved stones surrounding the forge. It's cool, but pulsing, almost like it's storing the echoes of every tool ever made here, every prayer ever whispered into the flame. And that's the beauty of this section of the tale. We're no longer talking about tools, or trade, or status. We're talking about faith, about a relationship between human and metal that runs so deep it crosses into the spiritual. A nearby child hums a tune you can't place. Then you realize it's the same rhythm as the hammer strikes you heard last week. The forge's voice has become music, and the music becomes memory, passed to the youngest before they even understand what it means. And when you ask what the tune is for, she says it's for when the fire listens. The ceremony ends not with a grand finale, but with silence. A final coal goes dark. The sculpture is dusted clean. The apprentice sits down, eyes wide and steady, and the elder nods once. Not a congratulations, just a confirmation. The forge has accepted him. For now, and you carry this moment like a charm in your pocket. One of those iron messages meant to say something wordless. Maybe it means I saw it, or I believe now. Or simply, the fire listens. The air tonight is different, heavier, as if packed with everything that's ever been said in a village square. You sit on the edge of a low stone platform, where a fire once burned, listening to the hush settle over a place that used to buzz. But don't be fooled by the stillness. You're now stepping into a world where blacksmiths weren't just making tools or even mediating spiritual moments. They were literally shaping who got to speak, what got remembered, and how stories got told. Because blacksmiths weren't only artisans or mystics. In many West African societies, they were the custodians of memory. It starts with the griots, the living historians of West Africa. These are the folks who can recite your lineage 10 generations deep, while snapping a talking drum between verses. And guess what? In more than one culture, griots and blacksmiths belonged to the same caste or family line. The same man who forged your spear might also sing your father's victories into legend. Here's your mainstream history bit. Among the manned peoples, especially the Bamana and Melanctha Nyamakala, caste included both blacksmiths, Numu, and griots, Jelly. These roles, while distinct, often shared familial roots and social expectations. The blacksmith held Nyama, the vital energy of transformation. The griot channeled it through word and song, two sides of the same mystical coin. And here's the juicy fringe tidbits. Some believe blacksmiths made not just musical instruments, but tuned oral performances. That's right before a griot sang. A smith might bless the drum or bell with fire, subtly shifting its tone so the story's emotional pitch matched the crowd. Think of it as acoustic spellcasting. Not everyone buys it, but historians still argue whether those performances had covert ritual components, or if that's just poetic embellishment passed down from starry-eyed apprentices. Either way, your next image is clear. A twilight circle of listeners, the firelight flickering on polished iron, and a griot leaning into a story. His voice rises, falls, soars, and beside him, a smith rests a hammer on his knee, nodding along like a conductor off stage. They're in sync, always were. Sometimes the smith built the very instrument the griot used to balafan, with slats tuned to ancestral frequencies, or a Donso Ngoni hunter's harp with iron rings crafted to vibrate at ceremonial pitches. The result, a sound that didn't just carry music, it carried weight. It meant something. And what did these stories often feature? You guessed it, blacksmiths, heroes in iron aprons who beat back invaders with flaming tongs or crossed rivers on anvils. Like the tale of Sogolon's cousin, the smith who built a bridge of swords to help the young Sundiata cross enemy lines. Never heard of him. Yeah, because the griot left him out during the king's retelling. Even oral history had editorial bias. But blacksmiths, they remembered. It wasn't all public storytelling either. In some regions, smiths carried family genealogies etched into iron charms or passed down via coded marks on tools. Imagine a hoe that holds your grandmother's name in notches only your uncle can read. History wasn't stored in scrolls. It was swung, worn, sharpened. You walk past a hut and spot a thin iron rod hanging beside the door, looped in a way that forms a symbol. You're told it's an ancestral line, a mnemonic, not quite a coat of arms, not quite a family tree, somewhere in between. And only blacksmiths know how to decode it. You sit down near the forge again, but this time it's quiet. The elder smith is rubbing a stone between his palms. He says he's remembering, not thinking, not reflecting, remembering, like he's downloading something stored in his bones. He tells you about his teacher's teacher, who once forged a bracelet with 12 twists each, one marking a marriage, a feud, or a birth. He tells you that when war came, that bracelet helped a mother identify her son's remains, not through grief, but by designs. The 11th twist had a notch, he says. That was for the boy born during famine. These aren't just trinkets, they're archives. You glance at your own fingers, no rings, no marks, just skin. But suddenly, you understand why someone would wear their story, even if it weighed like sorrow. The smith picks up a small iron burden. It doesn't do anything, just sits there. This, he says, was my grandfather's silence. You tilt your head. He couldn't read or recite, but he could shape iron into quiet things. We all knew when he made a bird like this, it meant someone needed protecting, a silent language, a forge-shaped alphabet. And you realize, even when they weren't, speaking blacksmiths were telling you everything. You just needed the right eyes to hear it. Back in the main square, a woman kneels to fix her sandal strap. You spot the iron buckle and recognize the pattern etched along its edged 3 dots. 2 dashes, 1 spiral. You've seen it before. On the elder's anvil, on the hut door, on the bird dot. It's the village's name, its identity, not written in ink, forged into everyday life. You lie down on a mat near the glowing embers and close your eyes. And though no one is speaking now, the stories still press in, not as words but as weight, as warmth, as iron just beginning to cool. You're lying on your side, curled slightly on a straw mat, with the faint glow of coals somewhere behind you, and all around the sleepy crackle of a village gone quiet, but not entirely asleep. Something soft shifts in the window, distant clank, a slow sweep of broom on dirt, a faint coffin, then quite close. The steady ticking of a smith sharpening a blade by moonlight. Yes, even now, in the hush, the work goes on, because you're not just in a place where blacksmiths are craftsmen or storytellers. You're in a world where they're problem solvers, fixers, mediators, the ones who get called when something breaks, be it tool, law, or trust. You stretch, slow and silent, and look toward the small hut across the courtyard. That's the smith's house, not grand, but sturdy. Notice the lack of doors. Some traditions required smiths' homes to stay open, an unspoken invitation, not just to neighbors with a broken tool, but to anyone with a broken situation. Here's your mainstream fact. In many West African communities, blacksmiths held not only technical knowledge, but also social authority. Among the Dogon, Senufo, and even some Hausa groups, blacksmiths acted as arbiters in disputes, especially land or inheritance conflicts, because they were seen as neutral parties, unbound by the lineage feuds that gripped others. And the fringe tidbit: there's an old belief that blacksmiths could cool tempers with iron, not metaphorically, literally, They'd place a cooled anvil between arguing parties, and by tradition, neither side could speak while touching it. If they broke the rule, the smith had permission to exile them from the meeting. Yep, that's one way to win an argument. Historians still argue whether this practice had actual legal standing or was more ceremonial, a symbolic show to cool heads, while elders negotiated in the background. But either way, the ritual gave blacksmiths weight, and not just from the iron. You follow the sound of that late-night sharpening and find the smith sitting cross-legged on a wooden slab. He nods when he sees you, then holds up a curved iron blade knot, a weapon, a farming tool, the kind you'd use to cut millet just before harvest, the kind that could bring in food for 50 or leave an entire household hungry if it broke at the wrong moment. He sharpens with care, measured strokes, no rush. This isn't about fixing the tulips, about fixing the day. You ask him why. He works at night, he grins. Because by morning they'll need it, and because at night iron remembers better. You're not sure what that means, but it lingers. Suddenly, a boy appears in the doorway, sheepish. He's carrying a broken animal, trapped wine, snapped iron frame bent. The kind of thing that can wait till dawn. But the smith doesn't wave him off. He motions him in gestures to sit, and silently begins the repair. You're witnessing something important here, not just a fix, but a lesson. The boy watches every motion, every twist of the wire, every rebend of the hook. And when the trap is returned to him, it's not just "Holitz, better than before." That's the quiet genius of blacksmiths. They don't just mend, they improve, whether it's a hoe, a quarrel, or a trap for wild hares. You're told that in some villages, blacksmiths also served as marriage mediators, not because they were romantic, but because they knew how to reshape things under heat. A stubborn a nervous groom, a hesitant bride, they could all be soothed by the steady patience of someone who works with fire for a living. That's not to say blacksmiths always got it right. There were missteps, failures, times when iron cracked instead of bending. But even then, the smith was expected to try to put the broken thing on the anvil, offer it time, effort, maybe even a whispered prayer. And more often than not, something useful came out of the smoke. The moon climbs higher, the coals dim lower, and you start to feel the deep truth of this place settle into your bones. Blacksmiths held the village together, literally by fixing hinges, locks, and nails. Spiritually, by anchoring belief and ritual. Emotionally, by listening when no one else would. You sit back now, warmed not by fire, but by the realization that every tiny metal piece you've seen tonight, every ring, hook, buckle, charm, was once part of a conversation, a solution, a moment when someone chose mending over tossing aside. And as you close your eyes, you hear a soft phrase whispered behind you. You don't know the language, but someone later tells you what it means. Let no blade rise without reason. Let no fire burn alone. You smile, because in this place you know it won't. Somewhere a rooster is thinking about crowing, but not quite yet. The village is still wrapped in sleep, and the forge lies cool for the moment. You sit by it, your arms around your knees, gazing into the last faint red glow deep in the coals. This is it, the final breath of your journey. But before the story drifts into memory, there's one last ember to catch. How the legacy of West African blacksmiths outlived the age of kings, conquests, and caravans. Because as iron tools gave way to industrial steel, and as colonial rule rewired ancient societies into something far less dignified, blacksmiths didn't vanish. They adapted, quietly, stubbornly. The same way iron bends before it breaks. You walk now through a market, not ancient, not modern, something in between. Tin roofs, plastic buckets, but there's still a corner stall with black soot on the walls and a bellows that wheezes like an old man. And inside, a blacksmith, wearing flip-flops and a faded t-shirt that says, "World's Best Grandpa," shaping a machete for a farmer who'll need it before the rains come. Your mainstream history fact in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Ghana, blacksmiths continued to serve rural communities even after colonial powers brought mass-produced goods. Factory-made tools may have flooded ports and towns, but out in the countryside, when your sickle snapped or your cart axle split in two, you didn't send for Europe. You walked to the local smith, and your fringe tidbit in some places, blacksmiths, still work from inherited forges using anvils that have been passed down for 150 years or more. Some of those anvils, it's whispered, were made from melted down cannonballs fired during colonial battles. If that's not poetic justice, what is? Historians still argue whether post-colonial governments fully recognized the cultural weight, art of blacksmiths, or whether they were pushed into obscurity in favor of shiny new bureaucracies. But on the ground, in the dust and heat, blacksmiths kept moving forward one blade, one nail, one repair at a time. You're now walking beside an elder named Mousa, who points to a rusted bicycle. "They don't make M like this anymore," he says with a fond sigh. "But I've fixed that chain 50 times. You ask how? He taps the iron bracelet on his wrist. Same hands that fixed plowshares. Iron remembers. You stroll on. In a nearby school, the science teacher uses a set of hand-forged compasses, blunt, heavy, and made by her grandfather. In a churchyard, the bell that calls people to prayer was shaped from old farm tools, blessed by the village smith to ring. True even in drought. You pass a mosque, whose metal gate creaks open with a hinge. The local imam insists was hammered by a smith who dreamt of it before he made it. Even in cities, where concrete muffles the rhythm of hammers, you find traces of grill work on balconies, iron crosses in cemeteries, and in old neighborhoods, signs in peeling paint. Baba Ironworks, nitrogen monoxide tool, too broken. That tagline sticks with you, because ultimately, this story hasn't been about blacksmiths making tools. It's been about blacksmiths making communities, shaping bonds between people, between past and present, between need and provision. It's about making meaning out of fire, resilience out of scrap, and identity out of things that refuse to rust away. You sit again by the cold forge and run your fingers over the side of the anvil. It's rough, chipped in places, but unmistakably solid, like the blacksmith's legacy. And as the stars start to fade, the world lightens. You can hear a child stirring, a goat bleating softly, a broom sweeping a courtyard. Another day is beginning. But this time, you see it differently. Every sound, every motion, feels like part of an ancient rhythm, still alive just beneath the surface. And somewhere behind you, someone drops a chunk of iron on a stone slab. The ring it makes is deep, clear, and eternal. Word count, 1094, and now. As the last notes of the story settle like fine dust in the corners of your mind, you find yourself drifting not just through memory, but through time itself. The fires have dimmed, the hammers have stilled, and the village lies silent under the soft grey curtain of dawn. You're not walking anymore. You're floating, as if the weight of iron has lifted, and what remains is only warmth, the kind that lingers long after the flames go out. The blacksmith's world, once so loud with clangs and crackles, now hums with a gentler sound, like breath, like rest, like the final exhale of a day well lived. You've seen how iron can bend, how fire can teach, and how a single anvil can hold generations. Let that shape your dreams tonight. There's nothing more to fix now, nothing more to remember, pour, carry, or question. You've heard the stories, traced the symbols, sat beside the forge. You've watched iron become memory, and now memory becomes mist. So let yourself fall, slowly, kindly, as if the mat beneath you were a cloud, and the quiet were a lullaby. Let the anvil's song echo one last time, steady, sure. Let the flames fade to warmth. Let your breath grow long. You're safe here. You're home. You can rest now.